The first time Commander Vexler of the Norathi Imperial Fleet witnessed Terran mercy, he thought it was a trick. His ship, the Crimson Blade, had been disabled in the battle above Kepler 442b. The Terran destroyers had torn through his fleet like predators through prey. Their weapons were not superior, not really. Their ships were not faster or stronger, but the humans fought with a coordination and ferocity that made the Norathi warriors look like children playing at war. Vexler had served the Empire for 40 standard cycles. He had conquered 12 worlds. He had never lost a battle until that day. When the Terran boarding party cut through the hull of his ship, Vexler ordered his surviving crew to fight to the death. This was the Norathi way. There was no surrender. There was no mercy. The defeated were killed or enslaved. This was how it had always been among the stars. His warriors formed up in the main corridor, their plasma rifles charged and ready. They would take as many humans with them as they could. They would die with honor. The airlock exploded inward, and the humans came through. They moved like water, flowing around cover, advancing in perfect teams. Their armor was dark gray, marked with simple symbols that Vexler would later learn were unit designations. They carried kinetic weapons that barked fire and thunder. The first exchange of fire killed 8 of his warriors. The humans lost none. Vexler raised his own weapon, ready to die. A Terran soldier appeared before him, moving faster than seemed possible. Something struck his arm and his weapon flew away. He felt himself falling, then strong hands caught him. The human did not kill him. Instead, the soldier spoke words that Vexler's translator rendered as, "Stay down. This fight is over." Vexler watched in confusion as the humans moved through his ship. They disabled weapons. They secured doorways. They shouted at his warriors to drop their guns. Some of his crew fought back and were killed, but those who surrendered were not executed. They were not executed. This made no sense. Vexler had studied the human species before this campaign. They were young, their civilization barely 1,000 cycles old by galactic standards. They were supposed to be primitive, emotional, easily frightened. The Norathi High Council had declared them a minor threat, suitable for quick conquest. The council had been wrong. Within an hour, the humans controlled the Crimson Blade. Vexler and his surviving crew, some 200 warriors, were gathered in the cargo hold. Human soldiers stood guard, their weapons ready but not aimed at the prisoners. A human officer approached. She was small by their standards, with dark hair cut short and eyes the color of deep space. Her translator device rendered her words in clear Norathi. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force," she said. "You and your crew are now prisoners of war. You will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions." Vexler did not know what the Geneva Conventions were. He assumed it was some form of torture protocol. "Kill us quickly," he said. "We are warriors. We deserve a clean death." Captain Chen looked at him with an expression he could not read. "Commander, we're not going to kill you. We don't execute prisoners." "Then you will sell us as slaves." "No, slavery is forbidden among our people." Vexler felt his certainty crumbling. "Then what will you do with us?" "We'll hold you until the war ends. You'll be given food, water, shelter, and medical care. When there's a peace agreement, you'll be returned to your people." This had to be a lie. No species in the known galaxy treated prisoners this way. The strong consumed the weak. This was the fundamental law of existence. But the humans did exactly what Captain Chen promised. Vexler and his crew were transported to a Terran prison facility on one of their colony worlds. It was not a torture chamber. It was not a death camp. It was a series of simple buildings surrounded by fences, with guards who watched but did not threaten. They were given clean quarters. They were given food that was strange but filling. Human doctors treated their wounds with remarkable skill. When some of his warriors fell ill from the unfamiliar environment, the humans provided medicine. One of his officers, a young female named Kuravit, was badly injured in the battle. The human surgeons worked for 6 hours to save her life. They could have let her die. She was the enemy, but they fought to keep her alive as if she were one of their own. Vexler spent long days watching the humans, trying to understand them. The guards were professional but not cruel. Some of them even learned a few words of Norathi, enough to exchange simple greetings. One young guard, a male with yellow hair and a quick smile, brought extra blankets when the nights grew cold. He said his grandmother was from a place called Norway, where the cold was respected. This was not behavior Vexler understood. These humans had every reason to hate the Norathi. The Empire had destroyed 2 of their colony ships before the war even began, killing thousands of civilians. Human propaganda should have painted his people as monsters. The guards should have wanted revenge. Some probably did, but they controlled themselves. They followed their rules. 3 months into his captivity, Vexler was given access to human information networks. This was monitored, of course, but the humans seemed unconcerned about their prisoners learning about them. Maybe they wanted Vexler to learn. He spent hours reading about human history. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had been brutal to each other. Their past was soaked in blood, filled with wars and genocides and cruelties that shocked even a Norathi warrior. They had invented weapons capable of destroying their own world. They had come close to extinction more than once. But they had also built something else. Out of their bloody history, they had created laws about war, rules about how enemies should be treated, agreements that protected those who could not fight. The Geneva Conventions were not a torture protocol. They were a promise that even in war there were lines that should not be crossed, that the defeated should be treated with basic dignity, that surrender should be accepted and honored. The humans had learned these lessons through centuries of suffering. They had seen what happened when there were no rules, when hatred was allowed to run free. They had paid for this knowledge with millions of lives. And now they applied these rules even to aliens who had attacked them without warning. Vexler thought about his own people. The Norathi had rules too, ancient codes of honor that governed behavior between warriors. But those codes applied only to other Norathi. Outsiders were not covered. Aliens were resources to be exploited, not beings to be respected. The humans were different. Their rules applied to everyone, even their enemies. This was either profound wisdom or profound foolishness. Vexler could not decide which. 6 months into his captivity, he was allowed to send a message to the Norathi High Council. He described his treatment carefully, knowing that his words would be analyzed for hidden codes or signs of coercion. The council would assume the humans had tortured him, broken his mind, forced him to praise his captors. But he wrote the truth. He described the food, the medical care, the guards who were firm but never cruel. He described the Geneva Conventions and the human belief that all prisoners deserved basic dignity. The council's response came 2 weeks later. They declared that Vexler had been compromised by alien mind control. His testimony was dismissed. The war would continue. Vexler read the response and felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his long military career, he doubted his empire. The war continued for another 2 years. The humans never wavered in their treatment of prisoners. Even as the fighting grew more desperate, even as Norathi attacks killed thousands of Terran civilians, the prison camps remained humane. Prisoners who attempted escape were captured and confined, not executed. Those who attacked guards were subdued and punished, not tortured. Captain Chen visited the facility once, a year after Vexler's capture. She looked tired. The war was taking its toll. "Why?" Vexler asked her. "Why do you treat us this way? We attacked your people. We killed your children. Why do you not make us suffer?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy. "Because suffering creates more suffering," she said. Because revenge is a cycle that never ends. Because we tried the other way a long time ago and it nearly destroyed us. She looked at him with those dark eyes. And because someday this war will end. When it does, you'll go home. You'll tell your people what you saw here. Maybe it won't matter. Maybe nothing will change. But maybe, just maybe, enough of you will remember. And the next war will be a little less terrible. Vexler did not fully understand her words, not then. But he remembered them. The war ended in the 3rd year. The Norathi Empire, battered and exhausted, sued for peace. The humans had not conquered them. They had simply refused to lose. They had absorbed every attack, recovered from every defeat, and kept fighting with a stubborn determination that wore down even the mighty Norathi war machine. The peace treaty included provisions for prisoner exchange. Vexler and his crew were among the first to be returned. Before he left, the young guard with yellow hair shook his hand. It was a human gesture of respect. "Good luck, Commander," the guard said. "I hope we never have to fight again." Vexler returned the grip. "I hope so too." He boarded the transport ship that would take him home. Around him, hundreds of Norathi prisoners did the same. They were thinner than when they had been captured, but they were healthy, alive, unbroken. As the transport lifted off, Vexler looked out the viewport at the human world below. He thought about everything he had seen, everything he had learned. The humans had shown him mercy. Not weakness, but mercy. They had proven that strength and compassion could exist together, that a warrior could be fierce in battle and honorable in victory. He did not know if his people were ready to understand this lesson. The Norathi Empire was old and proud and set in its ways. But Captain Chen was right. He would tell his people what he had seen. He would remember. And maybe, just maybe, things would change. Vexler had no idea how much things were about to change. When his transport arrived at the Norathi homeworld, Vexler expected to be questioned by military intelligence. He expected suspicion, accusation, perhaps even imprisonment. The High Council had declared him compromised. His career was certainly over. What he did not expect was a crowd. Thousands of Norathi had gathered at the landing zone. They pressed against the barriers, shouting questions, reaching out toward the returning prisoners. Cameras hovered everywhere, broadcasting the scene across the empire. Vexler descended the ramp and was immediately surrounded by reporters. They pushed recording devices toward his face, demanding answers. "Commander Vexler, is it true the humans did not torture you? Were you forced to work as a slave? How did you survive?" The questions came so fast that Vexler could not answer them. Guards pushed through the crowd and escorted him and the other officers to a waiting transport. The common soldiers were taken elsewhere for debriefing. Vexler spent the next 3 days being interviewed by intelligence officers. They asked the same questions over and over. They searched for inconsistencies in his story. They clearly believed the humans had done something to him, planted false memories, or used psychological manipulation. But his story remained the same because it was true. The humans had treated him and his crew with dignity. They had followed their Geneva Conventions. They had shown mercy. The intelligence officers did not know what to do with this information. On the 4th day, Vexler was summoned before the High Council. The council chamber was vast and ancient, carved from the living rock of the mountain that held the capital city. 12 counselors sat on elevated thrones, their faces hidden behind ceremonial masks. The supreme commander, ruler of the Norathi Empire, occupied the central position. Vexler knelt before them, as tradition demanded. "Rise," the supreme commander said. "Tell us of your captivity." So Vexler told them. He described the prison facility, the food, the medical care. He explained the Geneva Conventions and the human belief in universal rights. He recounted his conversations with Captain Chen. The counselors listened in silence. When he finished, they whispered among themselves. "You expect us to believe," one counselor said, "that these humans simply kept you alive out of kindness, that they gained nothing from this." "I believe they gained something," Vexler said. "They gained information about us. They studied us, learned how we think and behave. But that is not why they treated us well. They did it because their laws required it, because they believe all sentient beings have inherent worth." Another counselor made a dismissive sound. "Foolishness. The weak do not survive by being kind to enemies." "With respect," Vexler said, "the humans are not weak. We threw everything we had at them and they did not break. Their kindness is not weakness. It is strength of a kind I did not understand before." The Supreme Commander leaned forward. "Explain." Vexler chose his words carefully. "We Norathi believe that cruelty demonstrates power. We think that making our enemies fear us makes us strong. But the humans have shown me another way. They do not need to be cruel because they are confident in their strength. They can afford to be merciful because they know they will win in the end." "You admire them," the Supreme Commander said. "It was not a question." "I respect them," Vexler replied. "They are formidable enemies, but I believe they could be valuable allies if we gave them reason to trust us." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Several counselors called Vexler a traitor, a fool, a tool of human manipulation. The Supreme Commander raised a hand, and silence fell. "The war is over," the Supreme Commander said. "We signed the peace treaty because we had no choice. Our fleets are shattered. Our economy is strained. We need time to rebuild." Vexler nodded. This was the practical reality. "But the human way," the Supreme Commander continued. "This idea of universal mercy, of rights that apply even to enemies. You truly believe this has value?" "I do," Vexler said. "Look around us. Look at our soldiers returning from captivity. They are healthy. They are unbroken. Many of them are asking the same questions I asked. Why did the humans not kill them? Why show kindness to an enemy? These questions will spread. Our people will want answers." One of the younger counselors, a female named Threxara who had always been considered progressive, spoke up. "The commander raises a valid point. Our citizens are confused by the human behavior. If we dismiss it as propaganda or deception, we risk appearing ignorant. If we acknowledge it, we may need to examine our own practices." "Our practices are ancient and honorable," an older counselor snapped. "We do not need to learn morality from primitive newcomers." "Ancient does not mean correct," Threxara replied. "And the humans are not primitive. They defeated us." The argument continued for hours. Vexler was eventually dismissed while the council debated. He returned to his family home, where his mate and children waited. That night, lying in his own bed for the first time in 3 years, Vexler thought about the future. The council would not change overnight. The empire was too old, too set in its ways. But seeds had been planted. Questions had been raised. He thought about Captain Chen and her words about cycles of suffering. He thought about the young guard who had given him extra blankets and shaken his hand at the end. The humans were right. War created hatred, and hatred created more war. The only way to break the cycle was to choose differently. Vexler was just one commander stripped of his fleet, regarded with suspicion by his own government. But he could still speak. He could still teach. Over the following months, Vexler became an unlikely public figure. The news networks requested interviews. Educational institutions invited him to lecture. Citizens sent him messages asking about his experiences. He told the truth. He described human mercy without exaggeration, without embellishment. He answered questions honestly, even when the answers made the empire look inferior. Some called him a traitor, some called him a visionary. Most did not know what to think. But slowly, public opinion began to shift. The returning prisoners were the key. Thousands of Norathi soldiers had experienced human captivity. They had stories to tell, stories that matched Vexler's account. They spoke of guards who followed rules, of doctors who healed enemies, of a system that valued life even in the middle of war. These stories spread through the empire like ripples on water. They could not be dismissed as propaganda because too many witnesses confirmed them. They could not be ignored because too many families had loved ones who had returned healthy and whole. The humans, meanwhile, seemed content to let the Norathi draw their own conclusions. They did not crow about their moral superiority. They did not demand recognition for their behavior. They simply went back to rebuilding their damaged colonies and mourning their dead. This restraint impressed Vexler more than any boasting could have. A year after the war ended, the High Council made an announcement that shocked the Empire. They were establishing a commission to study wartime practices. They were examining whether the Norathi codes of honor should be extended to cover non-Norathi species. They were considering, for the first time in history, the possibility that aliens might deserve basic rights. The announcement sparked fierce debate. Traditionalists called it a betrayal of Norathi identity. Progressives hailed it as long overdue reform. Military leaders were divided, some seeing practical advantages in new rules, others fearing they would make the empire appear weak. Vexler was invited to advise the commission. He accepted. The work was slow and difficult. Centuries of tradition could not be overturned in months. Every proposed change faced opposition, criticism, and attempts at sabotage. But progress was made piece by piece. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other species were watching. The war between the Norathi and the humans had been observed by dozens of civilizations. They had expected the usual pattern, the stronger force crushing the weaker, the defeated being slaughtered or enslaved. Instead, they had witnessed something unprecedented. The humans had won while following rules that seemed to handicap them. They had shown mercy to enemies who had shown them none. And now, the mighty Norathi Empire was questioning its own traditions because of how well human prisoners had been treated. This was not how wars were supposed to end. Ambassadors from several neutral species requested meetings with Terran diplomats. They wanted to understand the Geneva Conventions. They wanted to know if these rules could apply to them. The humans, Vexler would later learn, were happy to share. This was their strategy. This had always been their strategy. Not conquest but conversion. Not domination but demonstration. They believed that if they lived by their principles consistently enough, others would eventually see the value in those principles. It was a gamble. It required patience, sacrifice, and faith in the basic decency of other species. It could easily fail. But it was working. 2 years after the war, the first Galactic Convention on Wartime Conduct was proposed. Representatives from 12 species gathered on a neutral station to discuss shared rules for military conflict. The humans presented their Geneva Conventions as a starting point. Vexler attended as part of the Norathi delegation. He was no longer a pariah in his own society. He was now considered an expert on human relations, a bridge between cultures. The negotiations were difficult. Each species had different values, different histories, different ideas about warfare. Some believed the strong had natural rights over the weak. Some thought mercy was simply a form of extended cruelty, giving victims false hope before their inevitable destruction. The humans argued patiently against these views. They presented evidence from their own history, showing how rules of war had reduced suffering without weakening their military effectiveness. They described the practical benefits of treating prisoners well, including better intelligence, easier negotiations, and improved relations after conflicts ended. But mostly, they led by example. During the conference, a crisis erupted. A pirate fleet attacked a civilian transport near the station, killing hundreds. The pirates were captured by a joint force of several species. The question arose of what to do with the prisoners. Some delegates argued for immediate execution, Pirates had no rights, they said. They deserved no mercy. The human representative, a woman named Ambassador Liu, stood and spoke. These pirates killed our people too. We have every reason to want them dead. But if we execute them without trial, we become no better than they are. We prove that our rules mean nothing when we are angry. We undermine everything this conference stands for. The pirates were given trials. Those found guilty of murder were imprisoned, not executed. Those who had participated but not killed were given lesser sentences. This was messy and imperfect. Some of the delegates thought it was foolish, but it demonstrated that the humans were serious about their principles. The conference eventually produced the first Galactic Accord on Warfare. It was not as comprehensive as the Geneva Conventions. It did not apply to all situations or all species, but it was a start. For the first time in known history, multiple alien civilizations agreed on basic rules for treating enemies. Prisoners should not be tortured. Surrender should be accepted. Medical care should be provided to wounded enemies as well as allies. These rules seemed simple. They were not. They represented a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization understood war. Vexler signed the accord on behalf of the Norathi Empire. As he wrote his name on the document, he thought about Captain Chen and her words about cycles of suffering. The cycle was not broken. Wars would still be fought. Beings would still die. But maybe, just maybe, the wars would be a little less terrible. 10 years after the war ended, Vexler stood before a graduating class of young Norathi military officers. He was old now, his scales faded to gray, his movements slower than they had once been. But his mind was sharp and his voice was strong. "You have been trained to fight," he told the young warriors. "You have learned tactics and strategy, weapons and formations. But today I want to teach you something that is not in your textbooks. I want to teach you about mercy." The cadets looked at him with respect. They had grown up hearing stories about Commander Vexler, the hero who had survived human captivity and helped transform the Empire's laws. "I was once like you," Vexler continued. "I believed that strength meant cruelty. I thought that showing mercy to an enemy was the same as showing weakness. Then I met the humans." He told them his story. He described the battle above Kepler 442b, the boarding action, the moment when a human soldier chose not to kill him. He described the prison camp, the guards, the doctors who saved Kuravit's life. "The humans taught me something important," he said. "They taught me that true strength does not require cruelty. A warrior can be fierce in battle and merciful in victory. These things are not contradictions. They are complementary." He paused, looking at the young faces before him. "When you go to war, you will face difficult choices. You will capture enemies who have killed your friends. You will have opportunities to make them suffer. The old codes would say this is your right, but I ask you to remember what I have learned. Cruelty breeds hatred. Hatred breeds more war. The cycle continues until everyone is destroyed. Mercy breaks the cycle. It is harder than cruelty. It requires more strength, not less. But it is the only path to lasting peace." After the ceremony, a young cadet approached him. She was nervous but determined. "Commander, I have studied the Galactic Accord and the human conventions. I understand the practical arguments for mercy, but I want to know something else." "Ask," Vexler said. "Do you believe mercy is right? Not useful, not strategic, but actually right. Do the humans believe this?" Vexler considered the question carefully. "The humans believe that all sentient beings have inherent worth. They believe this not because it is practical, but because they feel it is true. Some of them believe their gods commanded it. Others believe reason requires it. But the core belief is the same. Every mind, every consciousness has value that should be respected." He looked at the young cadet. "Do I believe this? I have come to believe it. It took me many years. It required me to unlearn much of what I was taught. But yes, I believe that mercy is not just useful. It is right." The cadet nodded slowly. "Thank you, Commander, I will remember." Vexler watched her go, feeling hope for the future. The galaxy was changing. It was changing slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and resistance at every step, but it was changing. The humans had started this change not through conquest, but through example. They had shown that a civilization could be strong and merciful at the same time. They had demonstrated that rules of war could survive even the most desperate conflicts. Other species were learning from them. The Norathi were learning. Even species that still refused to join the Galactic Accord were being influenced by its existence, forced to defend their brutal practices in a way they never had before. Vexler would not live to see the final outcome. He was too old and the changes were too slow, but he had played his part. He had carried the message from his prison camp to the halls of power. He had helped plant seeds that would grow for generations. Sometimes, when he was alone, he thought about Captain Chen. He had never seen her again after that single visit to the prison camp. He had heard that she rose through the ranks, eventually becoming an admiral, then retiring to teach at a military academy. He wondered if she knew how much her words had meant. He wondered if she understood the chain of events she had helped set in motion. Probably not. Humans were often like that, Vexler had learned. They did the right thing without fully understanding the consequences. They planted seeds without knowing what would grow. But the seeds grew anyway. The humans had shown the galaxy that mercy was possible. They had proven that the cycle of cruelty could be broken. They had offered a different vision of what civilization could be. And slowly, painfully, one species at a time, the galaxy was listening. 50 years after the war, a conference was held to celebrate the anniversary of the first Galactic Accord. Representatives from over 40 species attended. The Accord had expanded, been revised, and been strengthened over the decades. It was now the foundation of interstellar law, a shared framework that allowed different civilizations to coexist. The keynote speaker was a human, a young diplomat named David Chen. He was Captain Sarah Chen's grandson. He spoke about his grandmother, about her belief in the power of mercy, about her hope that one day the galaxy would embrace better values. He spoke about the progress that had been made and the work that still remained. Sitting in the audience was an ancient Norathi, so old that his scales had turned completely white. Kuravet, the officer who had been saved by human surgeons so many years ago, was still alive. She had devoted her life to advocacy for the new laws, becoming one of the leading voices for reform in the Empire. Beside her sat a holographic image, a memorial to Commander Vexler, who had died 10 years earlier. He had asked that his image be present at this conference, a final witness to the changes he had helped create. David Chen finished his speech and stepped down from the podium. The audience applauded. Representatives of dozens of species united in appreciation for the ideals he had expressed. The conference continued for 3 days, with discussions about expanding the Accord, addressing new challenges, and spreading its principles to species that had not yet joined. There were disagreements and debates, compromises and concessions, but the fundamental framework held. Wars still happened, they always would, but they were less terrible than they had been. Prisoners were treated with dignity. Surrender was accepted. Medical care was provided to enemies. The worst atrocities were prevented or at least condemned and punished. This was not utopia, it was not perfect peace, but it was progress. On the final day of the conference, a resolution was passed unanimously. It expressed gratitude to the Terran civilization for its role in establishing the principles of mercy in interstellar law. It acknowledged that while humans had not invented these ideas, they had championed them with consistency and courage. The resolution also honored Commander Vexler and the other early converts who had carried the message to their own peoples. Change required not just leaders who proposed new ideas, but followers who embraced them. As the conference ended and the delegates departed, the galaxy continued on its slow path toward better values. There would be setbacks, Vexler had always known. There would be species that rejected the new ways, conflicts that tested the limits of mercy. But the direction was set. The humans had shown that it was possible. They had proven that strength and compassion could exist together. They had demonstrated that even in the darkness of war, there was light. And that light was spreading, star by star, world by world, until no corner of the galaxy was untouched. This was the legacy of Terran mercy. Not conquest but transformation, not dominion but example. The humans had changed the galaxy not by defeating it, but by showing it a better way to be. And the galaxy, in its slow and halting fashion, was learning. In the end, it was not weapons that made humanity powerful. It was not technology or numbers or resources. It was their stubborn belief that even enemies deserved basic dignity. It was their willingness to live by that belief even when it cost them. This was what Vexler had learned in his prison camp so many years ago. This was what he had spent his life teaching others. Mercy was not weakness, mercy was strength. And that strength had transformed warfare standards across the stars.